Zuri had always been the quiet one, the girl who worked hard behind the scenes and never asked for attention. She lived in Kumasi with her family, and though her life was simple, she carried herself with grace. Her older sister, Adan, was the opposite, bold, outspoken, and soon to be married to a wealthy businessman. The whole family was buzzing with excitement, and Zuri, despite being constantly overlooked, threw herself into the wedding preparations. She hung up flowers, folded ribbons, and helped the planners arrange every last detail. She was genuinely happy for her sister, even when Adan barely acknowledged her efforts. But Adan never missed a chance to remind Zuri of her place. Every little thing Zuri did was criticized. Too slow, too plain, not good enough. Zuri swallowed it all, smiling through the sting, telling herself it was just Adan's way. The night of the rehearsal, the family hall was filled with chatter, music, and laughter. Zuri stood nearby, adjusting decorations on the stage, when Adan's sharp voice cut through the air. "Don't stand near me," she snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You'll ruin the photos with your face." For a moment, the room went still, and then laughter broke out among the guests. Some covered their mouths, others chuckled openly. Zuri froze, her heart cracking in her chest. She felt the sting of tears pressing at her eyes, but she forced a smile instead, pretending it didn't matter. Inside, though, it felt like the ground had slipped beneath her feet. She stayed quiet, because that's what she had always done. The next morning, as the wedding preparations continued, a new face appeared in the busy hall. His name was Chaik, the photographer from Lagos. People whispered about how good he was, how his photos were more than just pictures. They were like paintings. He moved quietly through the crowd with his camera, capturing little moments most people didn't even notice. While everyone else focused on Adan, Chaik's eyes kept drifting toward Zuri. She wasn't dressed up like the others. Her hair was tied back, her dress plain, her hands busy carrying trays of flowers and folding fabric. But there was something in the way she moved, gentle, careful, almost glowing without realizing it. When she laughed softly with one of the younger cousins, Chaik's finger pressed the shutter. When she bent down to fix a crooked chair, he captured her again. To him, Zuri's beauty wasn't in makeup or jewels. It was in her kindness, her quiet strength, the way she seemed to belong in every corner of the room, yet never asked to be seen. Zuri, however, felt the opposite. Ever since her sister's cruel words, she tried to stay away from the camera. Whenever she noticed Chaik lifting his lens, she turned her head or ducked out of sight. Her chest still carried the weight of that insult, the laughter of the guests ringing in her memory. She thought she looked too plain, too unworthy of being captured. But Chaik noticed. After a while, he walked over to her, his steps unhurried, his voice soft. "Why do you hide?" he asked, holding the camera by his side. Zuri shook her head, embarrassed, pretending to busy herself with folding napkins. He paused, studying her face, and then said gently, "You have the face of someone who carries stories. That's what makes you beautiful." The words startled her. For a moment, Zuri forgot to breathe. No one had ever spoken to her that way before, not with such honesty. She looked up at him, searching his expression, but there was no mockery, no pity. Just truth. Something shifted inside her then. She wasn't suddenly confident, not yet, but a small light flickered where there had only been shadows. For the first time, someone saw her, not the plain girl, not the sister in the background, but Zuri. And in that moment, standing in the middle of all the noise and decorations, she began to believe maybe she wasn't invisible after all. The wedding morning was full of noise and color. Drums beat outside, women sang as they carried trays of food, and children ran between the chairs decorated with gold and white ribbons. Zuri had been up since dawn, making sure everything looked perfect. She tied bows, fixed centerpieces, and even helped calm down a nervous bridesmaid who had misplaced her earring. Her hands were tired, but her heart was still full of love for her sister. She told herself that today she wouldn't let yesterday's insults sting her. Today was Adan's big day, and she wanted to do her part quietly, without being noticed. But Adan noticed anyway, only it was never with kindness. As the family gathered for photos, Zuri stood carefully at the edge, not wanting to draw attention. She thought maybe, just maybe, she could slip into one picture. After all, she was family too. But before the photographer could snap the shot, Adan's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Stay out of the family shots," she snapped. "You're too plain. You'll ruin my perfect album." The words dropped like stones in the room. For a moment, there was silence, then a wave of murmurs spread through the guests. Some shook their heads in pity, others nodded like they agreed. A few even smirked, as if it were entertainment. Zuri felt her chest tighten, her throat dry. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but no words came. It was like her voice had been stolen. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall where everyone could see. She forced herself to smile, the same way she always did, but it felt heavy and broken. Inside, though, she felt erased, like she wasn't even blood, like she was nothing more than a shadow at her own sister's celebration. Quietly, without drawing attention, Zuri stepped back. She slipped out of the hall, her footsteps quick, her head bowed low. Once outside, where no one could see, the tears finally came. She pressed her hands to her face, ashamed of how much it hurt. The music and laughter from inside drifted into the air, but it felt a world away. She thought of all the times she had been compared, all the moments she had been silenced, all the years she had been told she wasn't enough. This was the breaking point. She couldn't bear it anymore. As she stood there, wiping her face with trembling fingers, she whispered to herself, "They won't see me broken." It wasn't just a promise, it was a vow. For the first time, Zuri realized she didn't need their approval to exist. She walked away from the hall, her heart still heavy but carrying something new. The quiet decision that she would no longer beg to belong. The sun was hot outside the hall, the kind of heat that clung to the skin and made the air feel heavy. Zuri leaned against a wall, her chest still tight from holding back tears. The laughter from inside floated out through the doors, a cruel reminder of the place she had just escaped. She wiped her cheeks quickly, not wanting anyone to see her weakness. But when she looked up, she froze. Chaik was standing a few steps away, camera hanging from his neck, eyes fixed on her. He hadn't gone back inside with the others. Instead, he had followed her, quiet and steady, like he knew she needed someone to notice. "Why do you let her speak to you like that?" he asked gently. His voice wasn't accusing, just full of concern. Zuri swallowed hard. At first, she wanted to brush it off, to say she was fine. But the weight of all those years was too heavy to hide. She let out a shaky breath and whispered, "Because that's how it's always been. I've always been compared. To her beauty, her confidence, her loud voice. I've always been the one who is less." Her words broke in the middle, but she kept going. "If I speak, I'm told I'm bitter. If I stay quiet, I'm invisible. No matter what I do, I never belong in the picture." Chaik didn't look away. His eyes held hers, steady and firm. Then slowly he lifted his camera. "Then let's create photos where you're the masterpiece." The words struck her like lightning. For a moment, Zuri just stared, unsure if she heard him right. Her? The masterpiece? She wanted to laugh it off, to say it was impossible. But his face was serious, his tone sure. He wasn't flattering her. He was giving her an invitation. Her heart pounded. A part of her hesitated, that old voice whispering that she wasn't enough. But deeper inside, something stirred. A spark. Courage, small but real. She straightened her back just a little, lifted her chin. For the first time, she wondered what it would feel like to stop chasing inclusion, to stop waiting for scraps of love, and instead write her own story. Zuri looked at the doors of the hall, where her sister's laughter echoed, then back at Chaik, who stood there like a doorway to something new. "I don't want to beg to be in their picture anymore," she said softly, almost to herself. "I want my own." And in that moment, she decided. She wasn't going back inside to be erased again. She would no longer live as the shadow. With Chaik's steady gaze and the camera waiting in his hands, Zuri took her first bold step toward a story that was finally hers. Inside the decorated hall, the music had grown louder. Drums pounded, women danced, and Adan stood in the center, glowing in her gown, surrounded by guests who cheered and clapped. To everyone else, it was the perfect picture of joy. But in the quiet corner where Zuri had left her bag, another story was unfolding. Zuri's hands shook a little as she picked up her small purse. It wasn't much, just a few personal things she always carried. But in that moment, it felt like she was gathering the pieces of her life. Her heart raced, but her steps were steady. She looked around once more, the hall full of laughter and color, and realized how little space she truly had in it. Nobody would notice her absence for long. Nobody except maybe Chaik. As she started toward the door, a few distant relatives caught sight of her. One aunt gasped softly, another whispered to the person beside her. Their eyes followed Zuri, curious but not enough to stop her. No one moved to ask why she was leaving, no one called her back. And that, strangely, gave her strength. Outside, the air felt lighter, cooler, as if the world itself was waiting for her choice. Parked near the edge of the street was Chaik's car. He stood by it, as though he already knew she would come. His camera still hung around his neck, but his eyes were only on her. Without a word, he opened the passenger door. The gesture wasn't grand, and it wasn't pity. It was simple, quiet, and full of respect. An invitation, not a rescue. Zuri paused for a heartbeat, the sound of drums still echoing faintly from inside. Then she stepped forward and slid into the seat. Chaik closed the door gently behind her and walked around to the driver's side. When the engine started, the car rolled away slowly, leaving behind the music, the flashing cameras, the cheers that had never included her. The road stretched ahead, wide and uncertain, but Zuri felt something she had never felt before: freedom. Her chest loosened, her tears dried, and for the first time, She wasn't weighed down by the need for approval. She didn't care if her absence left a gap in the photos. She didn't care if whispers followed her name. She glanced at Chaik, who kept his eyes on the road, calm and steady, like he had been waiting for this moment too. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of one where she chose herself, where she was no longer erased, where her voice and her face mattered. As the drums faded into the distance, Zuri leaned back in her seat and allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't running away anymore. She was walking into her own life. The days after the wedding felt like a new world for Zuri. She had left behind the noise, the whispers, the cruel laughter, and now found herself in Chaik's quiet but vibrant world. His life was surrounded by art, photography, and beauty, but not the polished kind of beauty she had always been told she lacked. His was the kind that lived in everyday people, in simple smiles, in the rhythm of life itself. Chaik began taking photos of Zuri almost immediately. Not posed, not stiff, but natural. He captured her early in the mornings, standing by the window as the sun painted her skin gold. He photographed her in the market, laughing as she bargained with a vendor, the colors of fruit and fabric bursting around her. By the riverside, he caught her staring into the water, her reflection dancing in ripples, her expression soft and thoughtful. Every click of the camera was like a reminder. She mattered, she belonged. At first, Zuri felt shy. She was so used to hiding from lenses that standing in front of one felt strange. But the way Chaik looked at her through the camera was different. He wasn't searching for flaws or comparing her to anyone else. He was seeing her, just her, and showing her parts of herself she had never noticed. Slowly, her shoulders straightened. Her smile became real, not forced. Her eyes, once heavy with doubt, started to shine. When Chaik shared a few of her portraits online, something unexpected happened. Comments began to flood in. People from Accra and Nairobi, even as far as Johannesburg, wrote about how striking she looked, how her beauty felt raw and real. Some said she carried a kind of strength in her face, the kind that couldn't be faked with makeup or filters. Zuri read the words in disbelief. For so long, she had been told she was invisible, plain, unwanted in the frame. Now strangers saw her as unforgettable. But the biggest change wasn't the compliments. It was the way she began to see herself. Every time she looked at the photos Chaik took, she didn't see the plain sister. She saw a woman with depth, a woman who had survived hurt and still stood tall, a woman with a story worth telling. Little by little, Zuri's confidence grew. She started walking with her head higher, her steps firmer. She no longer tried to shrink into corners or blend into the background. Even in silence, she carried presence. She wasn't just existing, she was becoming. For the first time, Zuri felt the truth in her bones. She had never been invisible. She had only been hidden under the weight of other people's voices. Now, with Chaik's lens and her own reflection as proof, she was finally learning to see herself clearly. And the woman she saw was beautiful. It started with just one photo. Chaik had taken it on a quiet afternoon by the riverside. Zuri was sitting on a rock, her hair loose, her dress simple, her eyes looking far away as if she was thinking of another life. There was no makeup, no jewelry, no forced pose. Just Zuri, raw and unfiltered. Chaik uploaded it to his page, never expecting more than a few likes from his usual followers. But the photo took on a life of its own. A fashion blog in Nairobi shared it, calling Zuri the face of untold stories. From there, it spread quickly. People across Africa began reposting it, commenting on her calm strength, her natural beauty, the way she seemed to carry something deeper in her expression. "This is the kind of beauty the world needs to see," one person wrote. Another said, "She looks like us, real, strong, unforgettable." Within days, Zuri's image was everywhere. Messages poured in, some asking who she was, others begging to see more of her photos. For the first time, the girl who had once been pushed out of family pictures was now the one the entire continent wanted to see. Then came the call from Accra. A rising designer, known for using fresh and unconventional models, wanted Zuri to represent his new collection. At first, she didn't believe it. "Me? A model?" she asked Chaik, laughing nervously. But he looked at her the same way he always did, steady and sure, and said, "Why not you?" While Zuri's name was climbing, Adan's wedding photos finally made their way on. They were staged, polished, edited to perfection, but they barely stirred any interest. A few likes from friends, a handful of comments, nothing more. Compared to the storm Zuri's portraits had created, Adan's pictures looked stiff, lifeless, and forgettable. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The sister who had been called too plain to stand in a photo was now the woman admired across borders. The girl who was told to stay out of the frame was suddenly the face of a movement that celebrated real, unfiltered beauty. Zuri felt overwhelmed at times. The attention was new, and part of her still carried the old wounds of doubt. But as she walked into her first fitting for the designer in Accra, draped in bold fabrics that seemed to tell stories of their own, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. She didn't see the invisible girl anymore. She saw a woman who had chosen herself, and the world had chosen to see her too. For the first time in her life, Zuri wasn't hiding. She was the picture. She was the frame. And everyone wanted to look. Months had passed since the wedding, and life had changed in ways Zuri could hardly have imagined. She had traveled to new cities, stood in front of cameras with confidence, and seen her face on posters and magazines. People who once wouldn't have looked twice at her now spoke her name with admiration. Yet, despite all the attention, she stayed grounded. Deep inside, she was still the same Zuri, only stronger, freer, and finally unafraid of being seen. When she returned to Kumasi for a family gathering, the air was different. The house buzzed as always, but this time, the whispers weren't about Adan's beauty or wealth. They were about Zuri. Cousins who once ignored her rushed forward to hug her. Aunties complimented her poise and grace. Uncles nodded with pride, speaking loudly about how far she had come, as if they had believed in her all along. Zuri smiled politely, accepting their warmth without bitterness, though she remembered well how invisible she used to be. Then, as expected, Adan appeared. She was still elegant, still dressed in expensive clothes, but her eyes carried something restless, almost uneasy. She watched as the family circled Zuri, as if the spotlight had quietly shifted without her consent. Finally, unable to hold it in, Adan scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. All this attention for what? She only got lucky. Don't act like she's suddenly special. The room fell quiet. In the past, her words would have been met with nods or laughter. But now, several relatives turned sharply toward her. An aunt muttered, "Enough." A cousin added, "Stop being bitter." For the first time, Adan's cruelty wasn't entertained, it was rejected. Zuri didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Standing tall, radiant in her simple but elegant dress, she looked at her sister with calm eyes and said, "You pushed me away from your photos, so I found my own lens." Her words hung in the air, soft yet powerful. The relatives murmured in agreement, nodding, some even clapping lightly. Adan's face burned red, her lips pressed tight as she looked away. She had no comeback, no cruel line that could undo what everyone now saw. Her insult had paved the very road to Zuri's success. Zuri didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or throw back all the years of pain. Instead, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity she always had, only now it shone brighter because she finally believed in it. In that moment, the roles had shifted forever. Zuri, once erased, stood at the center of her family's admiration, not because she fought for their approval, but because she had chosen to stop needing it. And Adan, who had tried so hard to keep her in the shadows, now had to watch her sister glow in the light. The news came on a quiet afternoon. Zuri and Chaik were sitting in his small studio, going through prints spread across the table. The walls were lined with portraits of people, market women, schoolchildren, street performers. And in the center, Zuri's face appeared again and again, glowing in different lights, each picture carrying its own story. That's when Chaik's phone buzzed with an email. He read it once, then twice, and finally looked up at Zuri with a smile that reached his eyes. "You won't believe this," he said. "It's from Heritage Weddings magazine." Zuri's heart skipped. That was the same popular magazine that had covered her sister's wedding, the one that had politely declined to publish most of Adan's photos because they were too staged and lacking. Now they were reaching out again, but not for Adan. "They want us," Chaik explained, still amazed. "They want to do a feature on my work, with you as the muse. Your story, your portraits, everything." Zuri blinked, unsure if she heard him right. The irony struck her hard. The same photographer her sister had hired only to capture her perfect day was now building his career around the sister she had dismissed as ugly. Fate had twisted itself into something almost poetic. The weeks that followed were a blur. The magazine organized interviews, photo shoots, and a feature that placed Zuri at the center. Readers from across Africa and beyond wrote in, praising her authenticity, her courage, her unpolished yet magnetic presence. Chaik's artistry gained more recognition than ever before, and together, their names began to rise. Through it all, Zuri and Chaik grew closer. It wasn't just about the photos anymore. It was about trust, respect, and a bond that felt deeper each day. When he looked at her through the lens, she didn't just see a photographer. She saw the man who had stood beside her when the world tried to erase her, the one who gave her courage when she had none left. Their laughter came easier now, their silences comfortable. Meanwhile, Adan watched from the sideline. She scrolled through the magazine's glossy spreads, her hands trembling with frustration. The very platform she had once dreamed of being celebrated in was now shining its brightest light on the sister she had worked so hard to belittle. Relatives who once praised her beauty now spoke more often of Zuri's grace. Friends who had shared her wedding photos online were now reposting Zuri's features instead. The bitterness grew inside her, but there was nothing she could do. The story had shifted, and she was no longer at the center. For Zuri, it wasn't about revenge. She didn't celebrate Adan's fall. She was simply living the truth she had discovered. She didn't need anyone's permission to be seen. And now, with Chike at her side and the world finally paying attention, she was more visible than ever. The gallery in Lagos was full that night. Walls glowed with Chike's photographs, portraits of faces that carried strength, laughter, pain, and truth. But at the center of the exhibition stood the largest piece of all, a towering portrait of Zuri. Her eyes were calm yet fierce, her posture proud, her beauty undeniable. The title written beneath it made the room fall silent for a moment before the applause began. The beauty they tried to hide. Zuri stood there, her heart swelling as she took it all in. Only months ago, she had been told to step out of photos, to stay invisible, to make space for others. She remembered the sting of her sister's words, the laughter of the guests, the way she had walked out of that hall in tears. Those memories would never disappear, but now she understood something she hadn't before. The pain had pushed her to discover her strength. Without it, she might never have found her voice, her courage, or this moment. The applause grew louder, echoing through the hall, but Zuri didn't let it blind her. She stepped forward, looked at the crowd, and spoke with steady confidence. "Never let anyone decide if you belong in the picture," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "Take the camera and write your own story." The words struck deep. People clapped, some even stood, others wiped their eyes. And in that moment Zuri, once erased, once silenced, was not only seen. She was celebrated, honored, unforgettable. This time, she was not just in the picture. She was the picture,